Hello, 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 and welcome to a tutorial on power blocks in Victoria 3. Power blocks were a major mechanic that came with the Sphere of Influence DLC, and has had some additions and changes to the benefits it provides in subsequent updates. It has proven to be a very valuable tool, but also one whose mechanics can seem a bit mysterious. I thought I had a handle on power blocks, but after doing some research for the video and diving into leverage versus leverage advantage, cohesion, statues, diplomatic mitigation, let's just say I realized...
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
So in this video, we're going to do a deep dive into how the mechanics work. The best way to go about it is to follow the life of a power block. We'll start with what power blocks are and how you create them. Then go into the mechanic of leverage and how you can get countries into your power block. And then how you maintain a power block and how the mechanics of cohesion and power struggle work. Like I said, power blocks came out with the DLC Sphere of Influence. However, you don't need the DLC to use them. Even without the DLC, you can create a power block and interact with others. But there are certain aspects of the mechanic that won't be available to you. Throughout the video, I'll point out where these differences are. Let's dive in. A power block is a union of countries based around a central ideology. The bloc gives advantages and some disadvantages to all its members, and some additional advantages specifically for the leader of the power block. There are 3 requirements to starting a power block. First, you need 500 influence. Second, you need to have a country rank of great power, major power, or unrecognized major power. And lastly, you can't be on isolationism. When you click on this icon here, if you're not in a power block, it brings you to this list of all the other power blocks in the game. If you are in one, it brings you to your power block. At the bottom, you'll see the button to form a power block. This screen lets you set up your own power block. At the top here, you can select the name of it, and below that you can customize your emblem and statue. Here's the first instance where the base game differs from the DLC. If you don't have Sphere of Influence, you can't customize your name, emblem, or statue. The emblem will be this generic one, and the name will be auto-generated. You can select the random name generator to select a different one, but you can't change what the name actually is. Now we get to the central identity pillar. Every power block has to choose one of these central identities. There's a couple things this affects. First, you have to choose one of the 2 mandates assigned to the identity pillar as your starting mandate. And each principle has something different. For a trade league, you choose internal or external trade. For sovereign empire, you have vassalization or exploitation of members. For ideological union, you have creative legislature or ideological truth. For military treaty, you have defensive cooperation or aggressive coordination. And for religious convocation, you have divine economics or sacred civics. Based on the central ideology you choose, you have to select one of the 2 options. After that, you can choose anything you want, even a mandate that was the option for one of the other central ideologies. Here's the other major difference between having the DLC and not. If you don't have Sphere of Influence, the only central identity pillar available to you is the Trade League. Along with that, you only get the 1 central principle group. At the bottom here, you can see you have an option to add 3 additional principles once you get enough mandate progress. Without the DLC, you can only have the 1 central principle. If you play as one of the nations that has one of those other locked identity pillars, you can play as that one. You just can't create a power block of your own using anything other than Trade League. Again, this is only if you don't have the DLC. To start your power block, you choose one of the 2 starting principles and you start on level 1. Over time, you will gain mandate progress, which we'll go over later, and when you earn enough, you can add to your principles. You can either add an additional level to an existing principle, or add a new one. Every principle has 3 levels and maxes out after you choose the 3rd one, with each level adding on to the benefits you receive. You can always get rid of a principle and swap it out for something else when you have an additional mandate. However, if you don't have one of your two primary principles, your power block will suffer a hit to cohesion. We'll cover cohesion later in the video as well, but you don't want it to be low, so don't swap out your primary principle. There are a whole bunch of principles you can add, each with 3 levels of benefits. I won't go through all of them since there are so many, but I will highlight 3 that I think have unique advantages. The first is the construction principle. At level 3, you unlock the ability to create the United Construction Conglomerate Company. This is one of the best companies in the game, and anyone can build it if you have the 3rd level of that mandate in your power block. You can see the 3 industries it builds and gives throughput bonuses to are essential to the steel frame buildings PM in your construction sectors. Once you reach prosperity, you get plus 20% throughput bonus to your construction sectors. So the buildings creating the input goods for the construction sectors are getting a throughput bonus if they're owned by the company, and the construction sectors are getting a throughput bonus as well. This will make construction in your country soar. Next is the foreign investment principle. If you reach level 3, you get foreign investment rights in all the countries in your power block who are a lower rank than you. If you are a great power, this can be massive, because so many countries will have a lower rank. You'll get foreign investment rights in multiple countries without having to spend influence to maintain a treaty. The last one I want to point out is the companies principle. If you reach level 3, you get an additional company slot. Seeing as how companies have become so much more powerful after the 1.9 update, any addition to the number of companies you can add is massive. You can see too, you get a free company charter, but even bigger than that is you also add to the company throughput bonus. I'm not trying to say these are the absolute best 3 principles you absolutely must have. Not at all. The thing that's great about the power block mechanic is the principles you want to choose are very dependent on your country and the type of run you're trying to have. The 3 principles I pointed out are more personal favorites of mine. But the more you play around with power blocks, the more you'll find your own personal favorites that are beneficial to your style of play. Lastly, on this screen, you'll see how long it'll take you to gain another mandate. Earning a mandate lets you add a new principle or upgrade an existing one. If you have a mandate available, you'll see it here. Bringing up the tooltip, you can see how this is calculated. To gain a mandate, you have to reach 2,000 mandate progress points, and there are various things that add to your point generation. The first is the rank of your power block. When you click on the All Blocks tab, you can see the list of all power blocks in the world and where yours ranks. The first ranked power block gets an additional plus 5 mandate progress points. The second ranked power block gets plus 4. The third ranked power block gets plus 3. The fourth rank gets plus 2. And then any other power block gets plus 1. The next part you'll see is you get mandate progress points based on how many nations are in your power block and what their rank is. If you bring up the tooltip for your central identity, you'll see a breakdown for this. For other great powers in your block, you get plus 10 mandate progress points for each one, plus 5 for major powers, plus 2 for minors, plus 2 for unrecognized major powers, and plus 1 for unrecognized regional powers. Lastly, you'll see this power block is getting negative 10% for being stable. This is referring to your level of cohesion, which is up here. The different levels are orchestrated, controlled, stable, divided, and fractured. We'll go over the mechanic of cohesion later in the video when we talk about how to maintain your power block. But for right now, you can see each level gives a different benefit or penalty to mandate progress points. Back to France and creating a power block. Once we select our central identity pillar and our primary principle group, and we've customized it so it looks beautiful, you can form the power block. The last thing to know is forming a power block lowers your relations with all the other countries who lead a power block. This isn't to say you should think twice about creating one, it's just something to keep in mind. You might need to improve relations with a couple of countries after creating your power block. Next, let's look at the special diplomatic actions each identity pillar gets. In order to use any one of them, you have to be the leader of the power block, and the country you enact it on must be in your power block for at least 5 years. For Sovereign Empire, you can subjugate one of your block members and turn them into one of your subjects. This is why you should be a little cautious when joining a power block that's a sovereign nation. Looking at you, Britain and Russia. The next one is if you have an ideological union, you can use force regime change. When you use this action, your subject will change its governance principles and distribution of power laws to match your own. The last one is if you have a religious convocation, and I think one of the most interesting ones. If you have this as your central identity pillar, you can change the state religion of a member nation to match your own. This comes with a number of benefits to acceptance. Pops in that country who are converting will now convert to your religion, and if they migrate to your country, they'll have a much higher level of acceptance. These diplomatic actions are things you'll do after forming the power block, and are probably more in line with the last chapter of the video, but you have to keep this in mind when creating the power block and choosing your central identity pillar, since you can't change your central identity pillar after forming the power block. If you want to change your central identity pillar after the power block has been formed, the only thing you can really do is leave your power block and then create a new one. With the power block, you have the ability to build a power block statue. The statue gives different benefits based on the type of block you are, but every statue provides +3 prestige. You can find it in the development section of your build list. The Wiki provides a great table that shows the various benefits. If you have an ideological union, it provides +5 influence and +25% to the political strength of the pops in the state you build it. With a military treaty, you get an additional +25% conscripts in that state. With religious convocations, you get +25% conversion and -10% to the effects of turmoil in the state you build it. Sovereign empires get a discount of -25% to decrees enacted in that state. And lastly, trade leagues get +10% loyalists from political movements and +10% infrastructure based on population in the state it's built. The last thing we'll talk about is the law requirements for using certain identity pillars. To use sovereign empire, you must be on monarchy. To use military treaty, you cannot be on national militia. And to use religious convocation, you have to be on either state religion or freedom of conscience. There are no law requirements for a trade league or ideological union. Now we're going to take a look at how leverage is calculated and how that affects bringing countries into your power block. We'll use an example in one of my offline runs where we've created the Trade League power block with the United States. Whenever you click on the power block icon, it'll bring up the power block leverage map. Countries that you have some level of relations with will display a number. This number is your leverage advantage or disadvantage. If the number is green, it's a leverage advantage. If it's red, it's a leverage disadvantage. For the sake of simplicity, I most times just refer to this number as a leverage advantage, whether it's green or red. We currently have treaties with France and the Netherlands that are earning us leverage to bring them into our block. Before we begin, there are two numbers we're going to look at. There's leverage advantage and leverage factor. Leverage factor is what determines leverage advantage. Leverage advantage is what determines if you can ask a country to join your power block. When leverage advantage is 200, you can ask them to join. In the map mode, the numbers shown are leverage advantage. Leverage factor is a little hidden in the tooltips. Let's first look at leverage advantage. Since France doesn't have a power block yet, countries are exerting influence over them to join their power block. When we bring up the tooltip, we see all the blocks that have some level of leverage on France. Right now, we are at -523. When we bring up the tooltip, it shows us that our current leverage on France is 113, and we are generating 3.5 points of leverage a week. We have -523 leverage disadvantage because you compare our leverage to the amount of unclaimed leverage. 113 minus 637 equals -524. Wikimath to -523 leverage disadvantage. Unclaimed leverage is basically how much of the target country's own leverage they still hold. We have 113 leverage because our leverage share is 11.3%. This calculation is referring to the current leverage. At any point in time, if you add up everyone's current leverage, it'll equal 1,000. Right now, France has 637. We have 113. The Ottomans have 14. Austria has 31. The UK has 75. The Russians have 61. And Prussia has 66. This adds up to 997. Vicky math to 1000. This calculation always has some Vicky math, since you'll notice there are no decimals with any of those numbers. However, they all have decimals that we don't see. This is the current leverage, but what is more important is the predicted leverage, and this is where we get into leverage factor. Every country generates leverage on France, and all that leverage gets added up to a total leverage factor. Right now, the total leverage factor for France is 5,026. When we bring up the tooltip for that number, we can see a breakdown of how it's calculated. This is the leverage factor for each power block. Ours is 1,462. When we look at the tooltip, we'll see a breakdown of how it's calculated. We're getting plus 100 for having an interest in the region. Next, we're getting plus 24 for economic dependence. A very small number because when we bring up the tooltip for that, we see we're not too economically tied to France. If we had investment rights with France, which we do and we'll see in a moment, and had more buildings built there, which we don't, we would get more leverage on them. Next, any trade routes we do with France generates leverage as well. But right now, France is not economically dependent on us, so this number is low. Next, we're getting plus 100 for having a strategic adjacency with France. You have a strategic adjacency with a country when you are in the same region as them. Looking at the map of declarable interests, all the countries in North Germany have strategic adjacencies to each other. All the countries in North Africa have a strategic adjacency to each other. All the countries in Indonesia have a strategic adjacency to each other. However, strategic adjacency doesn't mean sharing a land border. For example, Spain and France are in two separate regions from each other, but they do share a land border. In this example, we've created a power block with Spain, and we've set a strategic interest in France. So we are now exerting leverage on them. When we look at the tooltip for Spain's leverage, we are not getting a bonus for a strategic adjacency, but the Ottomans are. Why is that? Like I said, you get a strategic adjacency if you are in the same strategic region as someone, but also if one of your subjects is in the same strategic region as the other country or one of their subjects. France owns this land in Algeria, and Tunis and Tripolitania are subjects of the Ottomans, and they are all in the North Africa region. Because of that, the Ottomans get a strategic adjacency to France. So back to our example with the United States, why are they getting a strategic adjacency? Because of Liberia. France owns these two states, and all three of these countries are in the region of Senegal. So again, we see we are getting plus 100 leverage for having a strategic adjacency with France. Let's give Liberia their independence and see what happens. Now, we no longer have a bonus for a strategic adjacency. Next, you'll see we're getting a benefit and penalty when it comes to culture, plus 150 from shared cultural traits. Our primary cultures are Yankee and Dixie. Both of them have the traits of Anglophone and European heritage. At the bottom here, you can see the primary culture in France is French. And when we bring up the tooltip, we see we share the trait of European heritage with them. So because we share that trait, we are getting the plus 150 points. But you can see we're also losing 74 points because of low primary culture acceptance. Back to the info on the French culture, you can see we only share a heritage trait with the French culture. Our current citizenship law is racial segregation, and with that, only sharing the heritage trait will give the French culture 50 acceptance points in the United States. That will put the French culture at level 3 open prejudice. So the French culture is not fully accepted in our country. French pops might be fully accepted if their religion score adds acceptance points to them as well, but the French culture itself is not accepted. For a breakdown on acceptance, check out my previous video. Next are the big ones. We currently have this treaty with France, which gives us trade privileges, a power block embassy, and investment rights in France. Each of those treaty articles are adding 300 points of leverage. In total, that treaty is adding 900 points to our leverage factor. Lastly, we see we're getting a 1% boost because of influence. The tooltip calls it diplomatic mitigation. What this refers to is the amount of excess influence you have. The amount of excess influence we have is generating plus 1% leverage generation. And lastly, plus 20% for being orchestrated. This is referring to the cohesion of our power block. Because our cohesion is in the orchestrated status, we get plus 20% leverage generation. All of these things add up to 1,462. 1,462 divided by the total leverage of 5,026 equals 0.29088 or 29%. This is why our predicted leverage advantage is 290. Right now, we're at 113, but we're drifting towards 290. Every power block has this calculation. The Ottomans are at 14 and drifting towards 15. The British are at 75 and drifting towards 65. And France itself is currently at 637 unclaimed leverage, but drifting towards 482. The reason I say drifting is because we have 29% of the leverage factor right now, but you don't get that amount of leverage share immediately. It changes week by week towards that number. Right now, we are getting plus 3.5 weekly leverage until our leverage equals 290. The way you calculate this plus 3.5 is take your predicted leverage and subtract your current leverage. 290 minus 113 equals 177. Then multiply the result by 0.02. 177 times 0.02 equals 3.54. We will gain 3.54 points of leverage every week until we reach 290. Now remember, you aren't actually gaining 3.54 points every week, because the result of this equation is adding to one of its own variables. At the end of this week, your current leverage goes from 113 to 116.54 after you add in the 3.54. So next week, the equation will be 290 minus 116.54, which equals 173.46. Multiply that by 0.02, which equals 3.47. So next week, the amount of leverage we gain drops from 3.54 to 3.47. Meaning, the farther you are away from your predicted leverage, the faster you go towards it. The closer you get towards the predicted leverage, the smaller the gain. This calculation has a minimum of plus or minus 1. For example, if we look at the British Empire, their predicted leverage is 65 and their current one is 75. 65 minus 75 equals negative 10 times 0.02 equals negative 0.2. So they get the minimum of negative 1. The thing to take away from here is, if all conditions stay the same, we will all end on these predicted numbers. We will have 290 points of leverage, and France will have 482 points of unclaimed leverage. 290 minus 482 equals negative 192 leverage disadvantage. So the red number here will go from negative 523 to negative 192, and it'll stay at negative 192 if we don't do anything else. So if we want to bring France into our power block, we need to do more. As opposed to the situation we have right now with the Netherlands, you can see our current leverage advantage is plus 165, so not enough to ask them to join our power block yet. However, if we look at the predicted leverage, the Netherlands are drifting towards 124 points of unclaimed leverage, and we're drifting towards 473 leverage. 473 minus 124 equals 349. So the green number here will eventually get to plus 349, well over what we need to ask them to join our block. The reason why things like trade privileges, power block embassies, investment rights, or anything that shows an addition of leverage is important is because it's doing two things. It's adding to your total leverage factor, and it's adding to the total leverage factor that everyone's total is compared to. This means it's bringing up your average and lowering everyone else's, including the target country. Because remember, you need 200 more leverage points than the target country to ask them to join your power block. Essentially, this is the same as saying you need your percentage of leverage factor to be 20% more than the target country's share of the leverage factor. And the importance of the fact that it's a drifting number is that if all conditions stay the same, we will get 290 leverage points. But in the time it takes us to get to 290, many other conditions can change. So this fight for leverage between the power blocks and the target nation is a constant back and forth. And like I showed, even if no conditions change and we get to that 290 number, remember that 290 is based on us having 29% of the leverage factor. Even if we get there, that's not going to be enough to ask France to join our power block. So, if you're simply trying to prevent a power block from getting a country to join, you might be well behind them in the race, but as long as you hold on to a certain percentage of the leverage factor, you can essentially prevent them from swaying the target country in. Leverage resistance is calculated through a few items. You start with a base value that's determined by your country's rank. Great powers start with plus 1,000, major powers get plus 750, minor powers and unrecognized regional powers get plus 500, and insignificant and unrecognized powers get plus 250. Then you get a certain amount for your population size. And lastly, any laws that are adding benefits or penalties to leverage resistance. France is getting plus 25% leverage resistance by having the free speech law of censorship. If we try to negotiate a treaty where one of the articles for France is to enact right of assembly, that would lower their leverage resistance, because right of assembly doesn't provide any leverage resistance. That would decrease this number, which would then decrease the 5,026 total leverage factor number. If we got France to get rid of censorship, this would have protectionism and no migration controls balance out, and their leverage resistance will be 1,940. That will also make the total leverage pool go from 5,026 to 4,540. 1,940 divided by 4,540 equals 0.4273. So their predicted leverage will go from 482 to 427. But our 29% number will go up as well. 1,462 divided by the new leverage factor total of 4,540 equals 0.3220, or a predicted leverage of 322. 322 minus France's new predicted leverage of 427 equals negative 105 leverage disadvantage. So our leverage advantage would go up because we lowered France's leverage resistance by making them change off of the law censorship. So you can see there are a number of things you can do to influence this leverage advantage number. The final stage of this process is when you finally reach at least plus 200 leverage advantage with a country and can now invite them to your power block. We now have met that threshold with the Netherlands. And now the invite to our power block option is available. But remember, this is a decision based on your relations with the country. The Netherlands will accept this, and here you can see why. If we ruin relations with the Netherlands, even though we've reached the plus 200 leverage advantage, they can still reject it. So you should also keep an eye on your relations with a country. If they reject it, it gives us a negative 50 to relations. Same goes for if you are invited to a power block and you reject it. You have the option to do that, but it will result in a negative 50 to your relations with that country. After you do that a couple times, the bloc nation will become hostile towards you and possibly lead to an eventual diplomatic play. So if you see a country gaining leverage on you, and it looks like they'll reach that plus 200 leverage advantage threshold, and you don't want to join their power block, it's best to stay ahead of it and try to prevent that leverage advantage in order to avoid future conflict. You can see we eventually got the Netherlands into our power block, but not France. This treaty and the pursuit of France to join our power bloc was actually pretty stupid, and I'll explain why in a moment. When the Netherlands joined our power bloc, so did all of their subjects, including the Dutch East Indies, which is why we now have 14 members. Let's look at cohesion. This is the metric that shows you how unified your power bloc is. You can't just let any random country join your bloc. Ours is ranked stable, so you can see we now generate negative 10% weekly mandate progress because of it. Looking at the tooltip, you can see there are a number of factors that go into calculating your cohesion, and many of them are specific to the type of bloc you have. Since ours is a trade league, most of everything on this list is related to our GDP and market. Most notably, the fact that we're losing 35 points of cohesion because the lowest ranked member of our bloc, Luxembourg, has no economic dependence on us, the bloc leader. As the leader of a trade league, we need to be engaged in trade with all of our bloc members to keep our cohesion up. The British Empire, which is a sovereign empire bloc, has a cohesion calculated based on relations and liberty desire. And the Metternich system, which is an ideological union, has a cohesion calculated based on how much the member nations match the bloc leader's government and distribution of power laws. Cohesion is also a drifting number. When the value changes, your cohesion doesn't go directly to that number. It drifts towards it week by a change of plus or minus 1. So here in the Zollverein bloc, their current cohesion is 93, but it's drifting towards 87, and it'll change by negative 1 each week until it reaches the target. This means you have some time to fix problems that might arise between the members of your bloc. Other things to consider about cohesion is if your power bloc is led by a country that's not a great power, you will suffer negative 50% cohesion. Also, all power blocs have plus 30 base cohesion, except the Trade League, which gets a plus 15 base. We're also losing 1.4 non-leader bloc members. Each power bloc has a penalty to cohesion for nations that are in your power bloc but not a subject of someone else. In our bloc, this negative 1 is because of the Netherlands. Everyone else in our bloc is a subject of either us or them. Trade leagues get less of a penalty for this, whereas sovereign empires get a penalty of negative 3 for each nation. All other power blocs get a negative 2 penalty. This isn't to say you shouldn't get other nations to join your bloc. It's simply a penalty for creating a bloc that's so large it would be realistically too difficult to maintain. The other thing to keep an eye on when maintaining your power bloc is the prestige of the other members. If a member nation gains 20% more prestige than the bloc leader, that nation can start a power struggle to become the leader of that bloc. Let's look at the game start for the United States. So now we don't have a power bloc. We fast forwarded a little bit, and now we're going to try to join the Ottomans' power bloc. We've created an interest in the region, and we're currently improving relations. But you can see here, if we try to host a power bloc embassy with them, they will heavily refuse. The reason for this is that we have more prestige than them. In fact, we have 24% more than them, which is more than the 20% threshold. So if we join their power bloc, we will immediately create a power struggle. They don't want us to join. This is why they don't want us to host an embassy for their power bloc. Once a power struggle starts, if the contending nation can maintain 15% more prestige than the bloc leader for 12 months, they will become the new bloc leader. If the original bloc leader loses leadership, they can eventually contend to regain power of the bloc. If you are the original leader, when you start the power struggle, you only need to maintain 15% more prestige for 9 months instead of 12. This is why it was stupid of us to pursue France joining our power bloc. Even if we were able to get them in, there would have immediately been a power struggle since they have so much more prestige than us. Not only that, but this treaty was also poorly made. Every article in a treaty costs influence, and we spent 50 for a power bloc embassy. That's 50 influence points that can be spent on another treaty or keeping excess influence. So always be mindful about who you are trying to get in your power bloc and if they'll add value to it in the form of cohesion and mandate progress points. Power blocks are very powerful tools in the game when you can manipulate leverage properly. The benefits you can stack from the various principal groups can really propel your nation forward. Along with that, joining a power block can be a very valuable thing as well. You don't always need to be the leader of the block. Keep an eye on the power blocks throughout the game and stay up to date on what principles the blocks are adding. Sometimes you might want to join a block if they have a combination of principles that will benefit your run. Keep in mind though that joining one nation's power block puts a strain on your relationship with the other nations leading the other power blocks. Apologies for the long video, but this was just too long of a topic to cover in a short format. So go do power blocks. As always, if you found the video helpful, consider giving it a like and the channel a subscribe, and joining the Discord. Every time you do, a power block adopts a rescue puppy. That's it for now. As always, be awesome.